Thank you. Angela, if you would like to answer next, just a little bit more about your first job and what you were looking for.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I was very focused in getting a job in broadcast journalism and TV news particularly. And I actually got my first job offer out of college from my TTV internship. So I was in Santa Barbara at the ABC station my junior year of NU, and I did everything. I mean, I was out on the field, reporting, writing, not really producing, but I was a good contributor to the team. You really hit the ground running during those internships, whatever it may be in. And after that, after I left, I think I came back to NU in the fall, and they called me and offered me a job. I'm like, I'm not graduating yet. I actually have to finish my year of college. And gosh, you know what? Actually, I think now that it's 20 plus years ago, I was a sophomore when I did that TTV internship, because I got back junior year fall and they asked me to join up. I told them to wait a year. I checked my credits and I rushed through the last year to graduate in 3 to take this job because it was that good. And I am from Southern California. So Santa Barbara to me was a dream to have a first job, not in like a Missoula, Montana or Timbuktu. I mean, it was a big enough market close to home. So that's what I did. I graduated early. I took the job. It was for a morning show news producer. And that was not what I expected. I was still trying to debate, do I want to be on camera? Do I want to be behind the scenes? What do I want to do? And I just decided to seize the opportunity and just to get a better feel of working in a real newsroom full time and seeing if I love it. You know, you're young, you can take those risks and take those opportunities. So I did, went to Santa Barbara. Morning show is no joke. If you've ever worked a graveyard shift, it is life-changing, not in the best way. So you are working Dracula hours. I went in at 10 p.m. I was by myself pretty much all night long, putting together an hour-and-a-half morning show. My anchors would roll in at maybe 3:30. My editor would come in around the same time, and we would put an hour-and-a-half show together for the market, which was incredible if you think about how small the staff is. And as the producer, you're in charge of everything. You're in charge of the entire show. It is your baby. You stack the show. You pick the stories. You are working with your one reporter in the morning to cover everything you can, and briefing your anchors and talent and the production staff. And then in the booth, you are running the entire show. So if something happens, I can't get a signal from our satellite feed, or this next guest who's, beaming in from Washington, D.C., you got to figure it out on the fly. And so it is an extremely stressful but rewarding job. I loved it. I did it for about a year and a half before they promoted me to the evening show. So I had it was the best training ground if you want to go into TV news. I thought it was just a way to really, you need to bootstrap and do everything on your own with a small team. And I loved it. And I fell in love. So I stayed in it for probably about a decade longer. But I love that in this first job, I really got a chance to touch everything and touch every part of the show and be part and really kind of be in charge of it. And what I realized in that first year is I really liked being a producer. I was good at it, but I enjoyed having the show and crafting the show and not having to actually fly around the country to cover different stories, which is amazing in its own right too. It just depends on your personality and what you're looking for. So I think in those first jobs, you're kind of feeling it out, saying, is this a good fit for me? Do I enjoy what I do? Do I love what I do? Can I see myself continuing on this track? And I did ultimately. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but that was my first job and my first experience. And there you go.
Thank you so much. Lastly, Sam, if you would like to talk a little bit about your first job experience.
Yeah, so similarly to Angela, my first full-time job actually came out of my journalism residency as well. It was kind of around sophomore year, I realized I really wanted to go into the art world, and I didn't really know how to approach that and kind of where to start, because you kind of hear about museums the most, maybe curating or going back to school and studying more to be a professor or honestly get those museum jobs. And I wasn't really sure if that was the path for me. And I think having that communications background as well with Medill, I was like, maybe I can pivot these things together. And so when the journalism residency list came out, there was one at ArtNet, which is an online, it's both ArtNet News, which is full art news, as well as an online marketplace, a gallery network, and a database of auction results. And it was actually a Northwestern alum who was leading that journalism residency. So that was very nice as well. I had a chance to meet her and was offered that opportunity to do my JR there. And that kind of rolled into a full-time position. So I was a marketing coordinator at ArtNet, and that was honestly at the time exactly what I was looking for. It was the perfect step into the art world. It's an all digital company, so it was very different from what I'm doing now in that you didn't really ever handle the artworks or see them in person. They kind of went from one place to the next without ever crossing through. And especially during my kind of time that I was starting there, it was COVID was like full swing. So we were fully remote, and it was just a kind of different opportunity in that sense. However, I did love learning more about the art world and the industry, and it really was a good way to learn about like how galleries function, how auctions function, and just get the full overview, as well as that marketing background. And being on a small team, you did touch everything in digital marketing that there was. So it was a great opportunity. I really loved it.
Thank you all so much. Our next question is, can you tell us more about your job function today? So kind of transitioning from when you first started to the present. And then the follow-up question to that is, does your work cross over with other industries? So Sam, if you would like to start with this one.
Sure. I think that I'll start my job function today, marketing associate, and that touches kind of all digital marketing that Bonhams does, as well as our print and kind of physical marketing as well. We do signage in the buildings and lettering in the exhibitions, but also print advertising. And I kind of touch everything digital marketing. So we work on editorial for our sales, social media, we stage photo shoots and video shoots. There's kind of paid Google campaigns. There's really everything. And it is, again, a small team. So we get to touch everything for our departments. So the way that we break it up is that we kind of split our team by different categories. So for example, post-war and contemporary art is one that I work on, and you kind of own that campaign from start to finish. So from meeting with the department or the specialists on that team to learning what is going in the sale and what kind of items are the most important to highlight, all the way through the sale day when that final email goes out and you get to watch the bidding. It's very fast paced and it's very exciting because you do get to go into the auction rooms and see those sales live, which is always really fun. And handling the artworks for photo shoots. So it's really kind of a all-encompassing marketing career. But in terms of crossover with other industries, I guess the art world is, in terms of like the marketing, I guess more so crosses over in that a lot of what I do is transferable to many other industries. In terms of digital marketing, I think those skills really can carry over anywhere. I think that the art side of it is a little bit specific, I guess, to other museum gallery jobs because of the fine art background that you gain and like learning more about these artists in the market. But yeah, I'd say the marketing is the most transferable area there.
Great, thank you. Angela, if you would like to go next.
Sure. So today I mentioned I do a lot of real estate investment, but I'm also a freelance media consultant. I've gone through many different roles in broadcast journalism and on the digital side at networks, from producing, as I mentioned, to being at the Today Show, to working at Bravo and digital media, to doing business development strategy. But so related to media specifically, now I kind of leverage everything that I learned in my days in broadcast to do media trainings for a lot of executives now. I live in the Bay Area. A lot of people need to do, whether they're speaking in front of conferences or, have big speaking events or media appearances, they need somebody to train them. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but they don't just go on and, prepare a few questions and whatnot. They're trained by professionals. And so as a producer, you have a lot of that inside knowledge as to, what might they ask you and how should you go about crafting your answers, especially in what might be sensitive topics. So I find that my skills as a journalist and just my training at Medill are just extremely transferable in any industry that you might want to pursue. And so I think just having that foundation of excellent writing skills, excellent communication skills will take you very far in whatever you might do, because I started in broadcast, I'm in real estate, I'm doing a lot of different things. And my Kellogg education definitely helped ground me in kind of more of the hard business skills that I was kind of missing in my journalism days. So I think that's now you can really see my what I really find important are those team management skills. So as a producer, specifically in broadcast, you're managing a big team of people. You're in charge of the show, you're in charge of the newscast, you're in charge of this team of reporters and writers and your talent and the production crew. And it's on you to make sure that the newscast goes off flawlessly every single day. You guys put the best product out there. And so I think on the soft skills side, leading teams, working well with other people, getting along with your peers, getting along with your colleagues, that actually is a huge soft skill that I think a lot of people maybe underestimate. And I think that's gotten me really far in my own career.
So I'm going to touch quickly on what my job looked like when I first started at Media Matters, because it's changed a lot in the time that I've changed positions. When I first started as a researcher, I worked on both a morning shift and a night shift. It would alternate every 4 weeks. And we would basically be transcribing Rush Limbaugh or Fox News and sending out emails on what is going on them, and then writing up trends, doing studies on what's happening, debunking different strings of misinformation. And so that's when I was on the research side. And now my function is a lot more like taking what our research team puts together and, presenting it to other organizations on PowerPoints, on webinars, doing a lot of coalition work, which includes getting people to sign on joint actions. Say there is, for instance, asking advertisers to stop advertising on Twitter after Elon Musk turned it into what it is now, or trying to get YouTube to remove, extremist content, or TikTok, for instance. So a lot of that coalition work might look like sign-on letters. It might look like working with other organizations and contacting platforms directly, or even briefing government officials about things that are happening. So I think the coalition stuff is really key as far as like a transferable skill, not only being able to coordinate a bunch of people within my organization, but outside of the organization, and having to be both firm in, asking multiple times, but also friendly, going to a lot of conferences and having those people skills, which I think maybe my theater degree hopefully helps with on that end at least. And then, writing, I used to write content for the website. I don't do that anymore, but I do write a lot of emails and a lot of research kind of summaries and memos that we share with people. So I think the writing is also really key, and just the ability to research as well, being able to just dig into things and correct, be skeptical of the information that we're getting and try to correct that, I think will help in other careers. It is a very niche job. I mean, there's not really another organization doing this outside of, some traditional media outlets are doing work like this. It is interesting to look at journalism through a nonprofit lens. And I think as someone who has a lot of friends who work at traditional journalism outlets, I will say that working in the nonprofit sector has maybe some more job security, which has been nice. And then another one of the areas in which it crosses over to is just generally in advocacy. A lot of people have gone from Media Matters to work for Planned Parenthood, for instance, or other liberal organizations there, or even political campaigns. So I think just generally that kind of plugged in, knowing what's going on in the news, following it to sort of an unhealthy degree even is very helpful and can help you in a lot of other careers.
Thank you. Angela, I'll have you start with this next question. As you're talking about working on a team and being good with connecting with people, this question is there any networking advice that would be helpful specifically for your industry?
Absolutely. I think that networking has gotten me every single job I've ever had. And you can't underestimate the power of networking, reaching out to somebody, getting to know somebody, even if it's reaching out cold. I mean, my first job, it was out of the internship from Medill, through Medill. So they knew me there. I got my second job. I thought I wanted to retire in LA because that's where I'm from. I said, if I could get to an LA TV station and run that show, that would be my dream. And I did that because, and this is back to be kind to everybody on your team, no matter who they are. There was a production assistant who worked on my morning show. He was training to be one of the assistant directors. And I mentioned, he knew I was from LA. He mentioned, oh, I actually have a friend who's a reporter down at KTLA. It was the station I grew up watching. And I said, oh, do you mind making an introduction? And he did. We connected. He said, send me your reel. I will get it to my news director. And I did. And they called me. And I was 25 at the time, 26. I was at that time an executive producer at the ABC station. I just worked my way up. And I went down for an interview last minute. I got the job offer. I took it. I took it the day after. You got to make them wait just a little bit. Negotiate that offer, guys. That's another big tip. And I took the job, and the next thing I knew, I was on a morning show again, even though I had vowed never to work on a morning show again. So I went back to the graveyard shift. I did that, but I loved it. And I, made my way over to the primetime newscast, which I loved. And I got to work with my childhood idol anchorman, who I grew up watching as a kid, and I was his producer, which was pretty awesome. So that was a great experience. But eventually I realized I wanted to run the station. Like, this was just not, and this is what you learn about yourself, I think, as you keep going. To Brendan's point too, he's worked a lot of different roles at his company, and you think you want to do this forever, maybe, but you don't know what you don't know. And so at the end of the day, I had met with the GM of the station. I said, this is great. What do I need to do? And I realized, like, my missing gap was the business hard skills. I had all the journalism skills, and I thought that, okay, if I could go to business school, I can really fill in the gaps. If I want to be president of NBC News, or if I want to be, running a network someday, this is what I think would make me stand out from the crowd. So I did, went to Kellogg, loved it, learned a phenomenal amount of, the education is just unparalleled, and it just opened my eyes to so much more. And then went to work at NBC for my full-time job after. I got the job at NBC out of business school because of networking, because there was one spot in this, NBC used to have a rotational program that was 2 years. It used to be owned by, NBC Universal used to be owned by General Electric, which is really funny if you think about it. But back in the day, they had this rotational program, and Kellogg at Northwestern had never sent an intern or a full-time person to NBC because it's just not heard of. We're not like a big media school, at least on the on the business school side. But I had gone to visit my husband at the time at Cornell. He went to business school at Cornell. There was an NBCU event. I went, even though I didn't go to that school. I went, I met the lead recruiter. I met some of the people who worked at NBCU, made the connection, came back to Kellogg, applied for the job. The recruiter who was a Kellogg alum was laughing at me. He's like, we never sent anyone. You're not going to make it to the final rounds. I'm like, okay, but I'm going to try. I made it to the final rounds, and he emailed me. He was so surprised. He's like, how did this happen? I'm like, I made a connection in New York, and it was random, but I pursued it. I kept in touch with the recruiter. I went to the final rounds. There was one spot in the country. I got that spot because I stayed at the final recruiting event. I was the last person standing. I was not going to go to bed until I was the last person there, just to, show them that I really was passionate about this job and this opportunity. I got the job, and that all of those roles were due to networking. Like, always reach out to your networks, and don't be afraid to meet new people, to make those connections.
That's such a cool story. Thank you so much for sharing. Next, Brendan, if you would like to talk a little bit about your perspective.
Yeah, that is an awesome story. And I also got all of my jobs through networking as well. So aside from my internship back in college. So when I first got my like paid internship after college, I had gotten connected with someone there at the public affairs firm through a sort of my mentor at the Human Rights Campaign. And then after I decided not to take that job, after I'd been interning there, I was like working as a temp, very unglamorous stuff like survey input while I looked for jobs. I think I applied to like 80 jobs at this year. I think it was 2015 before I ended up at Media Matters. And I was doing a lot of networking, meeting with people who I had known through my various internships, some Northwestern alumni, people who kind of had various senior roles in different places. And I ended up actually getting my job, or getting, the interview at the job I have now, through my roommate at the time. She worked at Media Matters as well. Actually, we weren't roommates at that time, but we ended up becoming roommates after this. But she was one of my good friends, and she worked there, and her girlfriend had been offered a job at Media Matters and turned it down. And I was like, oh, I applied there a few months ago, and I never heard back. Like, if they're trying to hire that position still, could you like tell them to look at my application? And they did. I got an interview like the next day and was hired about a week later. It was a very quick process. And a lot of jobs in the progressive sphere do move that way all the time. Because I've throughout the years made a lot of friends who work in the progressive ecosystem, and they'll be talking to me and be like, oh, we just interviewed a person who was a researcher at Media Matters, or someone who interned at HRC. It's very like interconnected. And now a lot of times people will connect me to young people who are just graduating college. Several times I've had people I know through coalition work sort of refer me to a friend or a younger person that they know, and I will just do a little 15-minute Zoom calls. The pandemic makes it very easy, or sometimes phone calls, and like at least 3 of them have been hired by Media Matters. When 400 people are applying for a researcher position, especially when it might be sort of undefined how many we're going to hire. Maybe they'll hire 3, maybe they'll hire 4, maybe they'll only hire 2. So having someone who can give you a bump, and again, like I had no real connection to any of these people before. They were all just sort of friends of people. They knew people who I knew through coalition work, and that extra bump from someone just knowing your name at an organization can go really, really far. So it is, reach out to people however you may do it. Find their email, find their LinkedIn, and explore your network if you find a place that you're trying to get a job. And I would also recommend not just doing it when you see a job opening, because a lot of times if you send an email to someone, it kind of feels like you're going outside of the hiring process. It doesn't mean don't do it at all, but a lot, if someone messages me and they're like, hey, I just applied for this position, but I'm kind of outside of that process, it's a little harder for me to get involved in it, as opposed to just a more generic, like, hey, I think your work is really interesting. And then I'm always sort of having those people in my head when jobs come up at my organization.
Thank you so much for that insight. Lastly, Sam, if you would like to touch on this question as well.
Yeah, echoing everything that Brendan and Angela said, I think always be open to meeting new people, speaking to, emailing. I think specific to kind of the art space, something else that I've found is that it's very important to kind of show up for people and continue like withstanding those relationships. So there's a lot of people that maybe you meet through work or elsewhere, but especially in this space, there's always a gallery opening or an exhibition that people are holding. And I think going to those events, and they're also very fun, but it's an opportunity to say hello to maybe that person that you know, as well as meet new people. And I find it can be a little intimidating to walk into those spaces alone sometimes, but every time you'll find someone who's also there and you can start chatting, and usually they'll be in another area, maybe working in a different gallery or in a museum or something like that. And you can kind of make those connections very organically and then follow up. So maybe I think it's different in this space, but Instagram, for example, is a very common way to interact with people. Galleries are very active on there. Artists are very active on there. So if you want to meet those people. Maybe you can follow them there. You can always see when they have a show and then maybe show up again and show your support. And that's just a really good way to meet people, have interesting experiences, and also possibly further your career and your connections.
Great, thank you. I think we'll ask one more question of the prepared questions, and then we'll open it up to everybody else attending. So this last question really quickly is just, what do you wish you could tell yourself when you were in these student shoes? And we'll start with Brendan on this one.
Yeah, I've touched on it before, but I think it's just that, like, at least from my perspective, it's okay to change what you want to do, to leave college sort of not necessarily, like I said, I didn't know the career direction I wanted to go into until my last semester of college, until my senior semester. So I think just not feeling like putting too much pressure on yourself to have it all figured out. Some people do, which is awesome. It's awesome, like hearing Angela's perspective on this and seeing how the courses sort of matched up, and the JR experience lined up perfectly with her first job. So I think there's no one right way to do it, and being open to jobs. I mean, I knew what Media Matters was before I started working there, but it wasn't, at the top of my list for places to work. I just knew sort of that I wanted to work in the advocacy area. And I think also that for me, that means taking courses you like, doing extracurriculars you like. I mean, I even did marketing for a production just because I wanted to. And I think all those skills and even the people you meet, it might surprise you. It might lead to a career, or at least you'll just have some fun with it.
Thank you. Next, Sam, if you would like to address this question.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I wish I knew was just to be open-minded about different jobs and know that you can kind of combine skills into jobs. I think I saw things very black and white, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a journalist, or I have to be a curator, or I can be a marketer or something. But I didn't know that I could actually kind of combine those skills and find a niche that really worked for me. And obviously those can be kind of niche positions at first, but seek them out and look around, and those things do exist. I think specifically, again, from the arts lens, what I really wish I knew, especially just based on, I loved every art history class I took at Northwestern. They were all incredible, but I think there's very little focus on the market and the fact that art is bought and sold. It was very much, this is the history, this can go in a museum, this is what you need to know about it. And that was amazing and still very important in my day-to-day. But I didn't realize that actually there was this massive market, and it was very much a place that kind of intertwines with business and media and marketing, of course. So just be open. Things are out there that you might not even know exist that you could really enjoy doing.
And then lastly, Angela.
I echo all of that brilliant advice from Brennan and Sam. But I would also say something maybe we haven't touched on is go into whatever job or career field you go into and you want to work in with courage and confidence, but also humility. I think going to a place like Northwestern, you're surrounded by smart people. You're very well prepared for the world. And in my case, for broadcast journalism, I felt like you have all the skills you need. And when I went to the first job, I was fully prepared. Medill does a fantastic job preparing you for whatever you want to do in that space. However, I think some of the things as a 21-year-old, just fresh graduate going in and then working with my news anchor who was 60-something years old and had decades of experience on me, I wanted to go in feeling confident. So like, I'm the boss of the show, but also I forgot sometimes to really make those connections with the talent, and big ego talent, not a joke. I think those soft skills are actually so important. And sometimes you forget because you're young and you want to feel like you have to prove yourself. Like I have to act a certain way to be, to really fit in and, act the part. But at the same time, I wish if I were to go back, I would have told myself, you really need to foster those relationships with the talent, with your colleagues. And it mostly was in my position, really with the news on-air talent, who just had so much more experience. But if I had just gone in and said, I'd love to have lunch. I'd love to have dinner or just coffee with you and just pick your brain about your career, which, it didn't hit me really until a few years later that I should have done that. And it would have really helped, our relationship, because that could be really interesting too sometimes, working with on-air talent. But those are some of the skills that I wish that I would have worked on. And it really kind of goes back to that networking. It's just so important. And I think it just, it helps in so many different facets of your career as it goes on.
Thank you. So now for the end of our panel discussion, we'll just move towards student questions. I'll pass it to Emia to see if there have been any questions that have already been sent. And if not, you can just unmute and ask them directly.
Thank you guys so much for all those amazing insights. First, I just want to say I haven't received any questions so far. So if anybody wants to go ahead and raise their hand, unmute, like Olivia said, go ahead. If not, send it to me. I'll read them out loud, whatever you prefer. Also, if nobody has a question, well, if we're loading, I did have one actually. So I wanted to ask our wonderful panelists. So I know, Angela, you said that you ended up pursuing you said, I think it was an MBA at Kellogg, almost a decade after you graduated from undergrad. So I was wondering, you and everybody else, what are some ways that you've continued to expand your skills and learn further? Like you said, you noticed a gap maybe in your business acumen. Have you felt that you've been able to do that within your career, or have you had to look outwards? And just tell us a little bit of how you've progressed through your career in a learning perspective.
I think I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I love to learn. And I think as specifically coming out of Medill and as a journalist, you are required to become a quote unquote expert on whatever story you're covering that day very quickly. And Brendan probably has a lot of experience with this on the research side as well. But I mean, one day you're covering cancer treatments, the other day it's a disaster, one day it's an engineering fiasco. I mean, politics, that's a huge one. And you just have to get up to speed very quickly. So I find that the Northwestern education really kind of helps give you a really broad background in a lot of these spaces, just so you have kind of just broad-based knowledge and you have the skills to be able to research something quickly and to get up to speed on something. I think it's just so important to always figure out what are the skill gaps you might be missing, because I find so many of the skills you may have from one job, I've always found that there are always transferable skills. So even though I'm no longer actively in TV news, I think those teamwork skills, the leading skills, one of the biggest things I always hear from recruiters, and I work with a lot of C-level execs, is people who can work in teams. And Kellogg actually has their brand is people who work well in teams. And you're not just a leader, but you're also a team leader. And that you don't have all the answers all the time. You really have to lean on your team and the people around you to help support. You might not be the smartest person in the room, and to be able to admit that and say, hey, what do you think? Or do you have any ideas about this? Because I don't have all the answers. I think that's a huge skill. And again, goes back to that humility piece is in academics wise, you could do all of the things right, have the perfect resume. But I think that, I just love to expand my horizons, whether it's, going to a gallery or going to a local talk in the community, or just reading a good book or watching the news or whatever it might be. I think just the constant thirst of learning is just such a wonderful thing. And I do feel like Northwestern is kind of where that really took flight for me. So I think if you can always do like one thing a day just to learn something new, that's just kind of always been a motto of mine, and it will never steer you wrong.
Amazing, thank you. Sam or Brennan, either of you, if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, Angela hit the nail on the head as far as working in sort of the journalism industry or adjacent industry. We're constantly having to learn about new things. I mean, I was our point person for elections and misinformation about democracy. So I got to really immerse myself and learn a lot about that last year. Been focused a lot on attacks on education. So I've been learning more about sort of that realm, public education. There's people in my organization who have no healthcare background, but they have that at least as an interest that they have been getting into, or even immigration. And then, there's learning for work and learning for your career. And then I think I'm someone who loves to learn also just for fun. And it doesn't always have to be career oriented. So right now I've been taking Japanese class for a year, supplemented with some Duolingo, which is quite fun. So I think, or reading a good nonfiction book or even fiction book, I think you never know when those interests or those hobbies could affect your career. And even if not, there's just something, I don't know, maybe this is the Northwestern nerd in me, but your brain activates in a fun way when you're learning something new. So I really recommend, when you're older, if you don't pursue further education, which is not something that I ended up doing, to take a class in something you're interested in. And it's a good way also just to make friends and to have something keeping you sane outside of work as an adult.
Definitely. I think that like the and is in our DNA of Northwestern kind of encourages us to do that. Yeah. Sam, if you want to add.
Yeah, I think one more thing, and kind of going back to something Angela said about making time to meet with your colleagues and pick their brains about their career, I think also just in terms of learning, that's a very helpful thing to do. I know specifically where I am, but I'm sure in so many other workplaces, there's so many people who are very passionate about what they do in their kind of area of the business. And so I'm coming from the marketing perspective, but meeting with, for example, a specialist of Japanese art or contemporary art or something, you can kind of sit down and they're so excited about what they're working on and they can share with you and you end up learning some facts. I think that's something I love about my job is every day you just get some little tidbit of information that's like, oh, interesting. I didn't know that before. So I think be open to just talking to people in other areas of the business, even if it's not necessarily for a business need, just to get to know them and learn from them and what excites them as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to open the floor back up if anybody came up with any good questions. Yeah, Lauren, go ahead and unmute whenever.
Hi, everyone. So my question's for Angela. I'm also super interested in television production. So I was just wondering, how have you adapted to the changes that have occurred in the television/media industry since the beginning of your career?
Well, I stopped working in broadcast in 2012. And I still, again, I do the media trainings, but I will say I still have a bunch of friends and colleagues who are still at NBC News and across the board. You find a lot of Northwestern alums. So that's always fun at the top of their game. So that's always great. I will say, nowadays, I feel like technology is just advanced so incredibly quickly. And on the broadcast, back when I was working, I mean, even at the Today Show or at NBC News Corporate, I was in charge of business development and strategy at the end of my career there, trying to figure out how do we do all this multi-channel journalism and partnerships. And that was something that was pretty new. I mean, even in 2010, I want to say, NBC News didn't have a hugely sophisticated digital presence. And that's a behemoth network. And sometimes the smaller guys are just scrappier and faster and willing to take more risks. We had to put out a perfect product, so it just took more time. They had just hired their first chief digital officer in 2011, which seems crazy now, right? Because that's such a core part of the multi-channel strategy of reaching your audience. But I worked for her at one point while I was at NBCU, and that just kind of they're still figuring it out, right? How do we engage with our audience on all platforms, wherever they are, whenever we can, whenever we want to. I think a lot of people, specifically correspondents and talent too, they now can work from home. A lot of them. And we've seen that during the pandemic where you'd see the news and they'd be broadcasting from their living room or their office at home. Everyone has a little mini studio now. So it's amazing how technology has really brought that about and that change in the industry. And now if you're a journalist or a reporter or even a producer, you are a multi-hyphenate video journalist, editor, producer, everything. I mean, I have a friend who's a medical correspondent for ABC News right now, and he shoots his own B-roll on his phone and records in his apartment and then goes in the studio for his live hits. But you really have to be able to do it all. And I think that's one thing that I really appreciated from graduating from Medill and even at Kellogg, just being able to do it all. And not be afraid to embrace change, because change will always be happening and we are moving so quickly. So I think that's something that, would be wise for all the soon to be graduates.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for the question. And thank you, Angela, for answering it so eloquently. Does anybody else have any final questions really quickly? All right. Antonia, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question, but it's not necessarily quick. It's more about if you've ever encountered a roadblock, how did you tackle it? So I don't know if there's a backstory behind it or if anything like that, but yeah.
Anybody feel free to answer. I think we only have time for one answer though, if that's okay.
Can you repeat the question, Antonia? I didn't really understand.
Sorry, so within your careers, has there been a roadblock where you were unsure of the next job you were to take? And from what you've said so far, it seems like your career was very transitional and not too choppy and things like that. I was just wondering, say Brennan or Sam, if you guys have encountered anything where like, oh, what do I do? Do I have to change my tactics or of getting a job or anything like that?
Yeah, I think maybe one example of that, as I mentioned, when I first started as a researcher, it was like years of periodic night shifts and transcribing, hundreds of hours. I probably listened to more Rush Limbaugh than like anyone's racist uncle has. So that was like pretty draining. I also got to do awesome stuff and like write about it and, even piss them off a little bit. But I think when I sort of hit the breaking point, I just talked to them, and eventually that's sort of helped lead me to a more managerial position and then the switch to a different team. So I think if you do find yourself frustrated at your work, but you do care about your work, it doesn't necessarily have to be, although it definitely can be, a complete career change. You can bring those things up to your work environment and let them know, because if you're a valued member of the team, sometimes they'll find a way to make it work. And it really has for me. I think I've had like 7 different positions. So that would be my experience.